Good morning. We are speaking with General Jeffrey Buchanan, who is the three-star Army Lieutenant General who has coordinated and led the federal military effort here in Puerto Rico, and he is preparing to leave next week. He made that announcement yesterday. General, thank you for your time.
Thanks, David.
You said yesterday that you believe the crisis is over, in your opinion. What did you mean?
So we, on the military side, are really here just for the emergency response. And we've been transitioning out of the emergency response for the last several weeks. Some areas still need help, but it's more of a sustained effort. And transitioning into more of a longer recovery and rebuilding effort. So just here's an example. You know, when we first got here, we had to do search and rescue operations. We had to open the ports. We had to clear the roads. And until we got the roads clear, we were dependent on helicopters to move supplies in. Well, the roads are all clear, so that makes the ability to provide support much more rational, if you will.
A lot of people, when you said that, local Puerto Ricans took exception and said the crisis is certainly not over where there's not water and people, you know, the bridges are still out and things like that. What are the indicators to you, beyond what you just said, that the crisis is over and now it's a recovery mode?
So I think that, you know, what people are talking about, you know, I've met with probably about half the mayors, 30-something of the mayors. I try to go, and not as a group, I go to them individually and meet with them inside their municipality. The tone of the conversation a month or 6 weeks ago was very dire. Here's really where we need help. We're still in the business of saving lives and those kinds of things. And now we're working on getting the right balance of delivery of supplies. So here's an example. If we keep pushing food to places that already have food, we don't allow the supermarkets to recover. And so we've got to have a good balance. And it really has to be tailored for each community. But in some community, the supermarkets are back. They have good stockage on the shelves. The PAN network, which is similar to the food stamp program here, is in full effect. And the supermarkets have generators so that people can go get that. And so there's access to food just like there was before the storm. If we keep pushing free food in there, then we're gonna stifle the recovery if we're not careful. So we've got to have a good balance. Other places still need help because they don't have good stockage in the supermarkets. And so it's now really, with FEMA's leadership, a tailored approach for each municipality.
What about the bridges? You still have a lot of communities where bridges are out.
Yes.
Is that the role of the federal military troops to rebuild those, or to temporarily establish
where we could cut a bypass with a bulldozer or something and establish what we call a high water crossing, right, and reinforce a crossing where people could drive across a creek or something like that. Where we could do that, we did that. But the rebuilding effort, bridges, infrastructure, you know, many roads are still washed out. Rebuilding of those really falls back on the Commonwealth's Department of Transportation and FEMA. And FEMA will use contractors or the Corps of Engineers to do that. And that's part of the long-term recovery. It's just like rebuilding houses. You know, many people lost their houses. Some just need to be repaired. Some are completely destroyed. And there's a program when they register through FEMA to get compensation, either to repair their house or rebuild their house. But that's part of the long-term effort, and that's not really what the military is here to do.
What is the role of the federal military troops on the ground here?
So really what we do is we're here for the emergency response. And if you think about it, you know, it doesn't make good sense to keep us for the long term for recovery, because the example I gave early on was truck drivers. You know, we had a lot of troops driving trucks, fuel trucks, water trucks, and everything early on. And the beauty of bringing military troops in is we've got a lot of great capability. We have a lot of people with good initiatives, strong backs, you know, vibrant minds, all of those kinds of things, and we can solve a lot of problems. But we're very expensive, you know, because FEMA, as part of the disaster recovery, actually pays for all of us. And so we're expensive. And the long term, what you want is you want that money, that whatever we're going to spend, we want it going into the local economy to help it recover. So here's an example, and I gave this a little bit yesterday, but the 14th Combat Support Hospital, out of Fort Benning, Georgia. We brought that in early October and established it in Umacow because the local hospital system there was closed. They had structural problems with electrical power, et cetera. So we brought a combat support hospital in there. And this is a 44-bed hospital complete with, orthopedic, x-ray, lab, pharmacy, ability to do surgeries, complex surgeries and everything. And so a great capability. That costs 17 C-17s to bring that in here. And so a pretty expensive endeavor to bring it. Now, well worth it. But now the local hospital, the Ryder Hospital and Oriental Hospital in Umacow, are back on their feet. Now it makes sense to transition, which they've been transitioning for the last 3 or 4 days, stepping down capability and helping the local hospitals step up. It makes good sense to pass all those patients back to the local doctors, because if we don't, the local system won't recover. The doctors, frankly, need they need the system to come alive with insurance and everything else in order to sustain their recovery.
What's been the price tag so far for the work your troops have done?
I do not know. I mean, we can get you an answer back.
What was the last estimate you heard?
Well, the last one, it's well into it's over, it's into the billions, and I'm not sure exactly what it is.
Just for the role of federal troops?
For the role, well, if you think about it, we brought, I can't remember again the exact number, but close to 1,000 strategic airlift loads in here, 72 helicopters. We flew 2,300 flight hours of helicopters on the military side, and when you add all that expense up, it ends up being pretty expensive.
How many federal troops have been here?
The highest we got to was just over 15,000. Now that number included some Guard troops as well, who were here in a state authority. But total military, we're over 15,000. Right now, we're down to about just under 11,000.
So you will leave next week. How many troops will draw down with you and depart?
So I would say, the transition is ongoing because many of them are leaving next week and the week after that by both sea lift and airlift. We'll be down to about 2,500 Army reservists that are based in Puerto Rico that will stay here, and close to 4,000 or 5,000 guardsmen, some from Puerto Rico and some from elsewhere. And we'll still have a handful of federal troops. For example, our defense coordinating officer who is partnered with FEMA, he'll be here until the last federal troops leave. We have 2 6-man Marine Corps teams, for example, one in Awadilla and one in Ceiba, that are here probably for several months because they've got a special Doppler radar to replace a National Weather Service capability that was destroyed in the storm. And from what I understand, there isn't a supply of these kinds of radars available. They have to build new ones. So until those things are available, we'll have our Marines here working in support of, in this case, National Weather Service.
So what I'm hearing is less than 30 federal.
It's less than 100 federal.
Less than 100, so
Right.
11,000 less than 100.
And the Army reservists are actually federal troops.
Okay.
So the 2,500, and they'll probably be on a number of them up well into December.
You said we tend to bring a lot of people and get here in a hurry. Do you feel like the federal troops got here in a hurry?
Well, I do. You have to, again, go back. We had troops here. Part of my command was here starting on the 4th of September, before landfall for Irma, and have been here ever since. From a mass perspective on the response, we brought the 2nd Expeditionary Strike Group, the Joint Force Maritime Component Command, into Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands right after landfall for Irma. They were responding for Irma. They got back out of the way when Maria came into the area. They moved out of the way of the storm and came right back in right after landfall and started search and rescue operations on the day after landfall. But based on that, the effects, they were in good position to handle the effects of Irma. And even with that, we had to bring in a couple of military hospitals into the U.S. Virgin Islands. But the effects of Irma were not that devastating in Puerto Rico. Maria was a completely different story. And General Robinson, my boss at U.S. Northern Command, made the decision based on the effects of Irma and what the maritime component, the Navy, was doing. She said, we need a much larger effort, and that's why we on the land component side got the nod. I wish I had all 15,000 in week one, but that was a physical impossibility because the first thing we had to do was open up the ports. We had to open the seaports and open the airports. And then getting the forces built up, it did take some time. It took a couple of weeks.
When did you have the forces built up to 11,000?
Up to 11,000 was probably 3 weeks after the storm.
Was that sufficient for you?
It was for the missions that we had. One of my highest priorities early on were to clear the routes and have some emergency medical support and helicopter support. Because if you think about it, almost all the roads were blocked. And because the roads were blocked, we had to depend on helicopters to get supplies into towns that needed it, especially up in the mountains. And we had a lot of capability early on. We got the right forces here early on to help. But over time, we've changed. We brought in more truck companies. We brought in some electrical power guys who are working for the Corps of Engineers, helping linemen, our U.S. Army reservists, linemen who are helping to work power grid. We have what we call tower climbers from the Air Force, a special unit out of Biloxi, Mississippi, that is here climbing communications towers and rebuilding the antenna network. So the land mobile radio system that supports both the federal government and the state police in particular is operational again.
Didn't you express early on, and I don't remember the quote, but didn't you say early on that we don't have enough people?
Yeah, yes, but that was only half the quote. So
well, tell me the full quote.
So I was asked whether we had enough troops here, and I said no, but they're on their way. So we don't have enough troops here. And again, this was the morning after I got it. This was in late September, and we didn't have the capability we needed, but it was moving and coming here.
So what can be? It's your job to be given a mess, so to speak, and figure out how to make it work in terms of response. What could be done differently going forward so that if you ever find yourself in the same position, things happen faster?
So broadly speaking, we have a process. It's called the National Response Framework. And the process is agreed to by every emergency management agency in the United States. And on the federal side, FEMA is the lead for that, and each state emergency management agency is a partnership of it, or has written into that, agreed to it. Even local fire departments. We all use the same system. And the system is designed to pull capability when requested. And in this case, we started pushing capability. And my boss, General Robinson, is, she's a believer in, we recognize state and in this case Commonwealth sovereignty. We want to let them ask for help, but at the same time, when we see that we need to help, we're going to take it on from a military expense, even if FEMA hasn't asked us for the capability, and we're going to get it in the right place so that we can respond more quickly. I thought that we were in good shape in Texas, providing response right away. We were in good shape in Florida. And I thought we had positioned ourselves very well with the Navy. The problem with Maria was that the storm itself, the Cat 5 storm, on the heels of another Cat 5 storm, was so devastating, and so the response required was way higher, way greater than we needed in Texas or Florida, and made all that much harder because we're an island 1,000 miles into the Atlantic.
And I hear you say that, and people do, but it's the United States military. I mean, these are the guys that make dreams happen and magic happen, right? And for a lot of people who watched it, it seemed as though it just took so long.
Well, we didn't have ports open. So I guess in retrospect, we could have conducted an airborne operation, flown troops in and have them jump out of an airplane. But, that's not really what those guys are designed to do. Jump out of an airplane to do what? It's not like they're going to seize a bridge or something like that, like we would do in combat. here we need to provide help. And you know, so
take that philosophy you proposed, General Robinson, you know, maybe we do something different.
Right.
Take that, what we do different, and apply it to this. What would have changed?
I think, you know, I think that as I look at my command's involvement, the land component command's involvement, I think that we should have pushed probably for things earlier. You know, the Navy was in charge, the Navy was the lead, the maritime component, and we were supporting them. If I would have taken on a better role, like General Robinson's philosophy of, okay, we're going to push capability there, and if we need it, we're in good position, and if we don't, then we've just eaten the cost. In retrospect, I should have probably pushed for more land component things early. That we just started moving to the area in time of need.
What would that have looked like?
Well, again, the same sort of things: helicopters, logistical, etc. Now the issue is, how do we get it here? You know, without ports opening and without without airports open or without seaports open, we could have potentially put more capability on Navy platforms that come in close. Now we already had that. That's what the USS Kearsarge was.
Right.
But we could have asked the Navy to bring in more capability, that we put Army or Marine Corps aviation on it, as well as naval aviation. We could have done some things like that. But you know, I think the effects of this storm were just so great, it made getting here very, very hard.
Understandable, but again, everybody knew going into it was an island, right? And I remember walking the streets with the governor a few days before the storm, where he predicted a catastrophe. And I don't think I understood, having not covered much news here in Puerto Rico, how the government was not financially prepared, or for that matter, logistically. And comparatively, you know, I was at Harvey, I was at Irma. You had two state governments that were far more prepared, right, and able to respond on their own.
So and again, that's the premise of the system.
Right.
So Mike Byrne, I think, he's the federal coordinating officer.
Right.
Very, very wise, very experienced in the disaster business. And he came up very early on and said, look, when we have a very large, a complex catastrophe, a big disaster like this, a lot of our processes that I talked about earlier, we got to put them aside.
Right.
And we have to change how we do business. So you can't be a prisoner of the process, and I'm a believer in that. Let me give you the military slant on this. At my level, one of the most important things that I can do when I come into a situation like this is define the problem. Define the core problem. And let me explain it. We spent a lot of time in the military growing up in our developmental process, learning what we call the military decision-making process. It's just a system for problem solving. Let's take this situation, figure out how to solve the problems. It's a planning process, and we're very, very good at it. I mean, we learn it from, you know, on the officer side, while we're in West Point or ROTC or officer candidate school. We learn it before we even become lieutenants. We're very good at this process. But the core situation is it's about solving a problem. If you don't get the problem right on the front side, you've created a whole nother mess. And so coming in here, the thing that I thought I could do as a leader of this organization was to first try to understand the environment and then define the problem. So for me, the core problem was Puerto Rico was overwhelmed. Now that's easy to say, but what the heck do I mean by that? Well, there's three real factors there. The first one is that I think that for everything you just described, weak infrastructure, the Commonwealth was in debt, et cetera,
bankrupt.
It was vulnerable.
Yes.
So Puerto Rico was vulnerable.
Yep.
That's the first thing. Second thing, there was low capacity to deal with the emergency. So again, I look at Texas and Florida, which we had just come out of Texas and Florida, two very rich states, very, very robust emergency management agencies, very capable National Guard forces, and they had a lot of capability. And on the federal side, we came in and plugged the gaps.
Right.
Where do you need help? And let's fill some gaps that you need help with. The third factor for me was that the impact of Maria, this Cat 5 storm, one of the 10th most strongest storm ever recorded in the Atlantic, was so overwhelming, it devastated everything. And when you add those three up, Puerto Rico was overwhelmed. So what? Well, coming in here as the military guy, I knew that we were not going to perform like we did in Texas or Florida. We had to have what I would call a far heavier hand in driving the logistical plan, for example. Instead of falling in on the Commonwealth's logistical plan and just figuring out how do we help them, we actually had to establish a lot of that in concert with FEMA. But we had to figure out what are we going to use for our logistical support areas, what ports are we going to open in priority, and how are we going to bring all these things in. So we played a much more significant role. If you go back to Texas or Florida, we were in Texas for a week and a half. We were in Florida for a week. And when you look at the number of federal troops, we had maybe a third to a half of the number of federal troops in Texas as the Guard did. We had probably a tenth of the amount of federal troops in Florida as the Guard did. And here, we had probably 3 times as many federal troops as the Guard did.
Exactly.
So it was a completely different situation. We've been here for weeks, and we played a far heavier role. But it was because the core problem is, add those 3 up: vulnerable, low capacity, and completely devastating storm. It was a different situation.
Finish this statement for me. In terms of doing it again, I won't do...
Here's what I will say. I'm thinking about it, and I don't want to say I won't make mistakes.
No,
because
I'm just talking
I've made mistakes.
Just in what you've learned, right? Because there may never be another event like this in your career, right? Because our states aren't islands, right? And so you may never have this again, but based on what you learned here, I would never, if you were talking to a class of officers, based on what I learned in Puerto Rico, I would never do this again.
I have a hard time with that because here's what I'll say. I have made a lot of mistakes over the last 2 months.
Name me one.
So, but I don't. The finished part is, I would try it again.
Sure.
I would try what I tried, and then make the mistake, and then change direction again. So here's an example. Early on, and I have never wanted us to take charge or something like that, because it's not our role. It's not the way the system is. But if you go back to the core problem, we had to play a pretty heavy hand.
Right.
So one of the logistic plans that we built in concert with the Commonwealth and in concert with FEMA was that on the federal side, we would help manage the ports and move the equipment from the ports only to the regional support areas, and then the Guard would take it from there. What we found out after about a week of trying that, and what was going to happen was the Guard was going to move it to the municipalities or in those areas, and the mayors were supposed to come to the municipality to draw their supplies.
Right.
Well, the mayors didn't have the capability, and the Guard didn't have enough capability. So what we found is we had to change how we operated, and on the federal side, we had to move things to a much lower level. But I don't regret trying the way we tried it. It's just I didn't have as good an understanding about what the capabilities were in the municipalities and what the capabilities were on the Guard side when we came up with that plan. And I learned along the way that they were overwhelmed too, and they couldn't get from point A to point B because roads were still closed and everything else. So we built a plan based on assumptions, but some of those assumptions turned out to be false. So then we had to change the plan. So I've learned that we're going to have to be very agile in this situation. Even if we have to be heavy-handed, the governor is still going to be in charge, and we're still in support of FEMA. We're not running the show for FEMA, but we've got to be agile at my level, all the way down to that squad leader who's got 4 guys in a truck and are figuring out how to get supplies from point A to point B. And so the point is to focus on what it is we're trying to get done, not focus on how we're going to get it done. Focus on what's important. We're trying to get supplies to Utuado. Okay, how are we going to get supplies there? Well, we have a plan, and we find out that plan's not going to work. Okay, we're going to need to use aircraft now for 5 days until we get this road cleared, or whatever.
Right.
And I think agility is key, but I believe that coming in. I've learned, and I don't think I was ever a prisoner of the process, but I've grown to appreciate even more that the process is a good outline, it's a good general direction to follow, but we need to drive what we do based on the situation, and sometimes the process isn't going to fit for that.
What decision did you make that turned out to be one of the most effective in terms of results?
I think route clearance is just an example. And we had 3 different entities working route clearance. So we had the United States Army Reserve, we had the Puerto Rican Army National Guard, and the Marines of first the 26th and then later on the 24th Marine Expeditionary Unit working route clearance. And we shifted their locations and what their priorities were based on what the need was. First of all, we focused on the interior, focused on the mountains, because I figured that the Department of Transportation could probably do a fairly good job around the coast, but let's focus these guys on the interior. And then we shifted them, and we were, again, not prisoners of you're responsible only for this area. We moved them from area to area based on what the needs were. And it wasn't me, it was subordinate leaders, and I thought they were very agile, and the result of that was we got the routes cleared very, very quickly, and we had a tremendous amount of detail in everything that was still an obstacle. So for example, for Utuado, the Marines went in there and they cleared everything they could clear. When there's trees across roads, they used chainsaws and cut them up, moved them off to the side. But there were some places where the roads were washed out. It was something that these guys could not fix. So they mapped every single obstacle that was still out there. And then we turned the results of that over to both the Commonwealth and FEMA, and we by municipality. So for Utuado, there was 83 obstacles that were still remaining. And if you click on a map of obstacle number 1, you pull it up and you say, okay, it says right here, here's exactly the obstacle, here's what we recommend to fix it, here's a picture of it, a link to the latitude, longitude, etc. Now, the Marines came up with the technique. Rather than use military systems, they actually used civilian systems, and of course our digital natives, the 25 and 30-year-olds and younger, they had systems on their phone. They used apps on their phone to take pictures and feed it right in, and it's that kind of initiative that solves problems. And then based on that, first of all, we were able to clear the routes, but then what was left, we were able to give the Commonwealth a good description of what was left to do to rebuild roads, so they could use to prioritize rebuilding roads. So overall, the big example for me is try not to control things. Delegate and empower, and your subordinates are going to come up with tremendous solutions and solve the problems. Much more than, if I tried to direct everything and control everything, we're not going to get nearly as good results as if we give broad ideas. Here's the task and purpose. Here's what, broadly speaking, the biggest idea is the purpose. Here's what we're trying to achieve and why. And then empower them to figure out how to get from point A to point B.
All right, so your staff gave us a 5-minute warning. Let me just make sure that I didn't miss any questions here that I had jotted down. Leaving Puerto Rico. What is, for now?
I'm going to come back.
You
as
will.
a tourist.
You will come
oh,
back.
Man, I love this place.
I plan to as well. I plan to as well. Finish this statement. Puerto Rico taught me.
Well, one thing, and you and I may have talked about this before, but I've been a believer that we have to be students of culture wherever we go. And in the military, you know, it's basically a human endeavor, no matter where we serve. If we serve in Iraq or Syria or Afghanistan, or, you know, go back to 1984 when I was in Honduras, wherever we go, we have to, if we want to be effective, we got to be students of culture, because it's all about human interactions. And you know, over my experience in Iraq, this feeling was reinforced, because many times we really didn't understand how the Iraqi people looked at the world. What was their frame of reference? What was their assumptions about how the world worked? And so we stubbed our toes quite frequently, because we were informed by Western culture. They were informed by not just Arabic culture, but that subset that's unique to Iraq. You know, kind of a blend of Sunni and Shia Arab plus Kurdish. It's just different. And so what I learned is if we don't try to understand the people there, then we're never going to be very effective in dealing with them. And I've believed that, but I never had any real experience in Puerto Rico. So coming here, and it's easy to see things as an outsider. You can observe things because they strike you as being different. So for me, and I've traveled all over the United States. I've lived in a number of states. But for me, what I would say is that, you know, a couple of attributes of the culture here is that community is very, very important to them. And family is very, very important to them. The criticality of family in Puerto Rican culture, to me, drives a lot. Okay, so I made those observations based on how I saw people come together in a time of crisis, and how I saw them work together to help their neighbors. By the way, not unlike what we saw in Texas and Harvey with, you know, the unofficial Navy. I can't remember the term.
Cajun Navy.
The Cajun Navy going to the sound of the disaster in their boats to help people, and I saw that a lot here, everywhere. And so from my perspective, that was something that inspired me and empowered our troops as they became partners in communities. But it was also something to draw on and try to reinforce, to get people to help each other. Because in the end, it was going to take that level of commitment, neighbors helping neighbors and families helping families, in order to get them out of the disaster.
Well, what did it teach you? What did Puerto Rico teach you?
Well, it taught me to love the people here. I mean, this is an awesome place. I'm just learning Spanish, so I've got a long ways to go.
Mine needs a lot of work as well. Thank you for your time.
Thanks.
Thank you. Appreciate it.